What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, bringing you another episode of our ADP Battles series. Today, I am joined again by Mikey. Mikey over here released his first video on the channel this week. If you guys haven't checked it already, check out Wednesday's video in the Dynasty stock market. Mikey's going to be heading that series for us. I was joined with him, and if you guys want to see how to spot a breakout, make sure you go check that out. But today, we got a big banger of an episode of ADP Battles coming for you. Two sets of players that are very highly regarded, as similar to last week's episode, in the fantasy community, all ranking in the top 6 at their position. But before we get into that, how you doing, Mikey?
I'm doing great, man. You know, when you asked me to come on here and talk about discussing the guys that we're talking about tonight, Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins, I'm like, oh, come on, man. That's like slugging it. We got to do it.
For sure. Before we head into those guys and the other two being Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook, we're going to hit the intro on you guys. Okay, so as Mikey was alluding to before the intro, to start it off, we're actually going to be talking about two highly regarded receivers in the NFL. Aside from fantasy for now, let's just talk about the two best receivers, in my opinion, in the league. Just phenomenal players, and that's going to be DeAndre Hopkins versus Julio Jones. So talking about their ADP. So DeAndre Hopkins, according to expert ADP, is currently going off the board as the wide receiver 4 at the 207, while Julio Jones going off as the wide receiver 5 at the 208. So me and Mikey are actually going to be agreeing on both of our ADP battles today, and we're both agreeing on Julio Jones for the wide receivers here. So for me, this is actually, to be quite honest, I mean, I love Hopkins. He's a great talent. I'm going to get into him a little bit later. But in terms of fantasy football for 2020, this is one of the easiest decisions for me. And the fact of the matter is, like, it's just baffling to me that Julio Jones is falling to the 207 in experts leagues, or 208 actually, in expert leagues at this moment is just insane. So, again, as I mentioned, Julio Jones, in my opinion, is the best, most talented receiver in the NFL. And that's a widely agreed upon opinion in general. I mean, you poll 50 coaches, 80% of them, I believe, voted Julio Jones as the best receiver in the league. And it's easy to understand why. So if you're just looking off of since 2013, which was actually his 3rd season in the NFL, Julio Jones has averaged over 90 receiving yards per game. And since 2014, has produced more than 1,394 receiving yards or more. The reason why I don't say 1,400 is because last year he was 6 yards off missing a game. Like it's just insane. He is the model of consistency in fantasy football. And the fact of the matter is, I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on, but he's so easily a top 3 wide receiver for me in fantasy football. And it's not really close, but talking about the situation, because that's the main contributor. I'll get you to input after as well. We know how the Falcons offense is. I mean, he's been on it. He's been the model of consistency in that system for years. If you're just breaking down the system from like each section, that system had 66.7% pass to run split in the NFL, which actually led the league last year, and 258 vacated targets. And while I love Hayden Hurst, you love Todd Gurley, we talk about Russell Gage maybe being a sleeper. Realistically here, 258 vacated targets are going to be supplemented between four total guys realistically that we can expect targets from. Not to mention we already saw 157 from Julio last year. Even if he gets a little bit of that, like, there's not much that can really change about the situation in a negative standpoint. Like, he's going to get at least 157. If not, he can approach 170. Who's saying he can't? He's the best fucking receiver in the NFL. So, I mean, if you're talking about it, I love that consistency I get from Julio. Again, 157 targets. That was only 23% target market share on his team. Whereas if you're looking with Hopkins, I'll talk about Julio. I'll get into Hopkins after.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. With Julio, it's like we already know what he is in this situation. It's not like his situation has changed. You know, like, we already know that he can and has and will continue to be a top 5 option year in and year out at the position. We know that his connection with Matt Ryan is arguably one of the best quarterback to receiver connections in the entire league. They are always on the same page. They're always getting it done. And very rarely do you get that bust game from Julio Jones. Like you said, he's incredibly consistent, which is everything you could possibly want for in any fantasy setting, whether it's standard, half point, full PPR, whatever your weird scoring is. Julio Jones is always going to be a top 5 receiver in this offense. And if you're just looking at these two purely based off of numbers, just even last year, if you're in a standard league, Julio Jones was the higher scoring receiver. If you're in a half point PPR league, Julio Jones actually finished just under him, but he played, or just under Hopkins, but he played one less game, still averaged out, I think it was like 0.7 or 0.8 more points per game. And then in full point PPR, Julio Jones was averaging about a half point per game more than DeAndre Hopkins. So it's like when you're looking at like the grand scheme of things, you're probably not going to go wrong either way. But Julio Jones, as we were saying, is in the exact same situation and is the best receiver in the NFL today. So it's to me, it's an easy choice. But I'll let you talk about DeAndre Hopkins' situation before I get too much into that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, again, like when it comes down to it, like DeAndre Hopkins to me is the second best receiver in the NFL behind Julio Jones. Phenomenal talent. But I mean, if you're actually breaking down the situation, it is kind of concerning for me, especially with the shortened offseason, him changing teams. So just breaking down the numbers from last season, I mentioned that he has garnered 150 or more targets in every season since 2015. And last year, his 150 actually was a 28.1% target market share on the Texans, whereas Julio's 157 was only 23% of the Falcons total. So in that the overall volume for Julio, he doesn't have to be a 25, 26, 28% target market share receiver to really return value on the overall volume of his targets. So when you're mentioning DeAndre Hopkins, we just got to talk about the overall change. So the target percentage is kind of crucial for me in terms of like how I can kind of project him for the Cardinals. Because if you're just looking at it, I mentioned shortened offseason, hasn't built that rapport with his quarterback. It's an air raid system, and in an air raid system, you really rely on multiple receiving threats as opposed to one alpha target dominant receiver. So realistically here, if he hovered around Julio Jones, like let's just play a hypothetical. If he hovered around Julio Jones's 23% target market share last year for the Texans, that would have only equated to 123 targets as opposed to 150. So for me, Hopkins is the type of guy who thrives with a ton of volume. You pepper him, he's going to make his hay. But we don't really know. Like, we've never really seen him not get that work. And in a shortened offseason, as I mentioned, with less rapport with his quarterback, realistically, like, I don't know how many targets I can really expect over that 123 mark, because I don't think it's going to approach the 150, but I don't think it's going to be at 123. Maybe it cuts down to 130, 135. While I still believe that's going to be worthy of a top 10 slot, Julio Jones is just firmly entrenched in my top 3 to the point where if it's the mid-second and Julio Jones is there, I'm not even thinking about any other receiver whatsoever. He's going to be on my team. So those are my thoughts on Hopkins. I mean, the talent is there. The ceiling is there. Just the floor kind of scares me in terms of the overall volume perspective.
Yeah, and to touch base on the whole target share thing, like I completely agree. You know, Hopkins is going from being the focal point of an offense to being just the top option. And I know it sounds like top option and focal point. Well, those are both pretty good things to go after. But if you're the focal point of an offense, you are literally like the offense. Like, as you said, it was a 28% market share. They didn't have a stellar run game. Will Fuller was arguably their only other competent receiver, and he can never stay on the field. So it's always just bound to happen, Hopkins in Houston. But now that he's going to Arizona, there is a large amount of talent on that offense, whether it's out of the backfield with Kenyon Drake and Chase Edmonds, or it's Larry Fitzgerald, who is one of the top 5 greatest receivers of all time. They have Christian Kirk there. They just drafted 3 rookies last year, and they want to get them heavily involved this year. Like, Hopkins is going to lose targets, and I will agree that he's probably still going to be somewhere between the 125 and 135 mark. Hitting 150 targets on that offense just doesn't seem realistic to me at all. So if you're breaking it down between the two, I definitely give Julio Jones the slight uptick on the talent, and I give him the way bigger uptick in terms of situation. And then revisiting what you had said, it's a shortened training camp. There is no preseason whatsoever. You can have as many unofficial workouts as you want. I don't know how many times Hopkins and Kyler Murray have worked out together, but between now and then, they're only going to be seeing each other in the weight room and on conditioning and everything like that. Like, they're going to get 3 weeks of practice in with each other, like 3 weeks of official practice in with each other before they actually step on that field to play in week 1. So for that reason, I'm smashing Julio Jones here 10 out of 10 times between these two.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned that, like, realistically here, like, yes, rapport can happen. Like, you could spend time with your guy. I get that. But the rapport only really builds when you're in game type situations. You're practice, you're playing offense versus defense. You're playing in the preseason. You're playing at the start of the regular season. Because let's be honest here, I can go out to my local field and chuck a couple balls with my friend and think I have some chemistry with him. Like, realistically, like, practicing in shorts is not going to build a rapport. Yes, you're going to get more familiar with the guy. You're going to build a relationship with him. I understand that. But realistically here, in terms of timing, in terms of, I want your route to be run this exact way. I'm going to lead you at this spot. This is exactly where the zone's going to open up on the defense. Like, you have to understand that that's a high mental processing that has to be developed between a quarterback and a receiver. That's only going to happen through reps. And those aren't available, especially for, again, if Hopkins had that offseason, or like hypothetically he was in the Cardinals system for longer, like, I can see the argument being made. But realistically here, there's just such a short time to really adjust that I can't even put him in the same tier as Julio. Like, Julio Jones to me is just one of the, like, if anybody has him outside their top 4, it's just one of the most disrespectful things I'll see on, like, there's going to be that Twitter head who does that. But anyways, we'll segue into the next ADP battle of the video. Again, kind of mentioned Zeke versus Kamara in last week's video. I'm going to mention 2 other high-profile running backs in Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook. So we're talking about the ADP. Dalvin Cook is currently going off the board as the RB5 at the 106, while Derrick Henry is going off the board as the RB6 at the 107. So again, for me personally, this is kind of like a preference in terms of what your scoring settings are, because I currently have in standard and half PPR, Derrick Henry takes the edge. Again, like, I'll talk about the concerns that I have with Cook. Whereas in half PPR, I mean, the catches are going to make it so that I probably would take Cook. So, I mean, they're so close. But again, half PPR, this is Henry for me. I know you're agreeing with Henry. What are your initial thoughts on the battle over here?
So when it comes to these two, I cannot, even if we're not battling between these two, I can't take Dalvin Cook at his current ADP. The contract talks are just getting so frustrating. Like, if you remember, what was it, earlier this week even, there was like the whole back and forth where we had like 4 different reports in one day where it was like, oh yeah, Dalvin Cook will be at training camp. Oh, no, he won't. Yeah, he will. No, he won't. Oh, I don't know where the coach is getting this from. Blah, blah, blah. Like, there's just it's so frustrating. And maybe it's just the Melvin Gordon situation is so fresh in my mind, but
Yeah.
I cannot spend a first-round pick on a guy that is threatening to sit out, even if it's only the first 2 games of the season. You can't spend a first-round pick on a guy like that, because you're almost guaranteeing yourself starting off your season 0-2 if you're completely busting on your first-round pick. So I really just don't like that. Dalvin Cook is a guy I'd be comfortable with taking in the mid to late second round if somehow he fell, but I could not stomach taking him in the first. And then even if he does play, if he comes out, let's say you draft him tomorrow and the contract is final in 2 days from now. Okay, that's great and everything. But Dalvin Cook also has those injury concerns. That has been a thing with Dalvin Cook over the last few years with him being in the NFL. It's just that there's always that thought in the back of your head that, okay, I'm probably not getting a full season from Dalvin Cook. So if he's coming in, he's at risk of missing the first 2 to 3 games of the season. Then at some point he might miss another 2 to 3 games due to injury. It's like, why are you paying a first-round pick for a guy that you might realistically only see 10 or 11 games with this year?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, he's got so much risk at this current juncture. Like, if I'm having my fantasy draft at this point, like, realistically, I'm probably gonna fade him no matter what at this current cost. If he's going at like the late first round, I can kind of buoy him with another elite back. That's kind of where I would much prefer taking him. Again, if it's a full PPR, I kind of like still see like 108. Maybe I'll take him around there. But you mentioned it. You hit it right on the head. I mean, your early round picks, you got to analyze your risk versus reward, because realistically, All those guys, if they hit their ceiling, are going to be great contributors on your team. But what is the floor of Dalvin Cook? The floor of Dalvin Cook is it becomes a Melvin Gordon situation. The team sees that Alex Madison is thriving. Maybe they put Cook into a lesser role. He's still got the injury concerns. It's just kind of a mess to the point where I got a guy with Derrick Henry who I don't care what people want to say. Oh, he doesn't catch the ball, whatever, yada, yada, yada. If I am going to make a prop bet right now on the biggest lock of the year in terms of running backs to finish with 1,500 plus yards and double-digit touchdowns on the ground, it's Derrick Henry. Like, it's plain and simple. Like, he may, like, in my opinion, he may honestly just be the best overall runner in the league. From a talent perspective, just as an overall runner, he is so good in that regard. If you need any more proof on that, Nick Schooks, actually from NFL.com, has his rushing yards over expectations metric. And basically what that is based off what your offensive line blocks you for versus your actual yards per carry, it kind of deciphers like the difference between them. And Derrick Henry, we know 5.1 yards per carry last year. His rushing yards over expectation was over a full yard more than what he was projected to get based off what his offensive line produced. The next highest was Nick Chubb at 0.9. So he was almost 0.2 yards each carry better than any other running back in the league last year. He's the king. I mean, King Henry, all hail. We saw what he did in the playoffs. Again, this guy, to me, he's in such a good situation that it's almost insane. Like, even if we get a little bit of a tick up on the receiving work, like, he doesn't need to get that receiving work. Hypothetically, what if we get a year where Derrick Henry gets 25, 30 receptions? He can legitimately, like, I love Christian McCaffrey's my one. He can legitimately be the RB2 in my opinion, realistically, if he got that uptick. Because to me, he's so dominant on the ground. Again, I mentioned the standard half PPR format, so he's going to be dynamite for you. The fact of the matter is people are going to fade him for whatever reason because this is his first year breaking out, realistically. He had the few games at the end of 2018, but this is the first full year he showed he's a legitimate back. And to me, it just makes no sense. He is firmly entrenched in the middle portion of your draft. If you're picking between 105 and 108, if you can get fucking Derrick Henry in that range, I'm telling you, he is going to be a great value overall there. And to me, again, when they're both on their game, it becomes like really close in terms of who it is between Cook and Henry. But because of the issues, because of the injuries, because of the contract, just be safe, take Henry, and reap the rewards because this guy is going to be running over defenses like his freaking breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, he does it on a daily. So, yeah, I mean, if we're just looking at the offensive line of the Titans, people are going to say, yes, they lost Jack Conklin. Big contributor last year. I am not going to say, oh, losing Jack Conklin doesn't mean anything. But at the end of the day here, they invested their first-round pick in another right tackle. That guy, Isaiah Wilson from Georgia, he is a freaking mauler. My guy, people are talking about Mekhi Becton's size for valid reasons. This guy, Isaiah Wilson, is a good 6'7", 330 pounds on the right side. You think they're bringing him in to be a nimble fucking pass blocker? No, he is the definition of a bear in the run game. You got a 6'3", 250-pound running back with a mauling mentality type offensive line. Like, he's going to push 320 carries. I think his floor is like 290. So, I mean, realistically, people want to say, and for valid reasons, oh, well, I like that PPR floor where he's getting like 30, 40, 50 catches. The floor that you're getting with Derrick Henry is he's going to touch the ball 330 times on the season. So if you want to miss out on that because you just want to fade and be contrarian, that's on you. But give me King Henry at this spot all day.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if there is one thing about Derrick Henry, it's that he is guaranteed for at least 16, 17, even 18 touches a game. Would it be nice to have the PPR upside? Yeah, absolutely. But he clearly doesn't need it. I mean, he's a top 5, top 6 running back. He's being drafted as a top 5, top 6 running back. And, Dion Lewis is gone, who has historically over the last couple of years been the receiving back in Tennessee. And the only guy that they brought in is Darrington Evans, a rookie. So it's like, it's kind of hard to imagine Derrick Henry doesn't see at least an extra 10 to 15 targets this year, which hopefully could lead to that 25 to 30 reception mark. If you're giving him, even if it's in half point PPR, if you're getting an extra, 8 points from the receptions and then, even if he only gains out of those 15 catches, even if he only gains like 100 yards, that's still an extra 20 points on the season almost.
Yeah.
So it's like if he's – and it's like sure, I understand the notion with Derrick Henry where it's like, okay, if he doesn't get me 100 yards and a touchdown, he's not having a great RB1 week for me. And that's a fair point to make. But if there's anyone that's going to be almost a lock to see 100 yards and a touchdown every single week, it's probably going to be Derrick Henry. So, I mean, I'll admit this time last year, I was not Derrick Henry's biggest fan.
Me neither.
I didn't think 2018 was a fluke. I just didn't think that he would be able to consistently keep up with that pace. But clearly he shattered that. He had like one, maybe two bust games last year. He's just fantastic. And now that he's on this big contract, do I think maybe they cut his usage back just a tiny bit? Sure, because they're going to want to make sure that he sees the end of his contract in 4 years. But I do think even if his rushing attempts take a step back, it's not going to be more than like 10 or 20 on the entire year. And like we were saying, like he could have more of a role on third downs. So, with that being said, I currently have Derrick Henry ranked as my RB5 for redraft. I have Dalvin Cook at the RB8. I know that taking your RB8 at the end of the first round makes sense, but I have this paradox where I cannot take Dalvin Cook in the first round right now. I will say if the contract situation does get solved before the start of the season, on draft day, I probably would lean Dalvin Cook just because I'm one of those people that heavily favors the PPR upside. But unless there is something literally ink to paper from Dalvin Cook, I'm taking Derrick Henry all day here.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned it too. And the narrative that I don't like is that like people just assume that if you're not like a PPR threat, you're not going to get a ton of targets. Just automatically, oh, you're not a good receiver. Like Derrick Henry was a very efficient receiver last year when he did get his catches. So like 20 targets for Derrick Henry can be 15 catches with a 70-yard receiving touchdown off a screen pass. We saw it last year. I mean, people think, oh, he's a big back. He's going to maul you. Yeah. Dude's got wheels. Dude, you get him in the open field, he can take one to the house. I mean, he's got legitimate 4 or 5 speed at 250 pounds. Like you give him a crease, he is absolutely housing it. So for me, like Derrick Henry is such a dynamic talent, but we talked about it. So to recap the video, we both agreed that we'd be taking Julio Jones over DeAndre Hopkins and Derrick Henry over Dalvin Cook. So anything you want to add here in this ADP Battles installment before we get out of here, Mikey?
No, nothing really. Just aside from I got to plug the Dynasty again, we're going to be coming out with the rises and fallers every Sunday, and I'm going to be coming out with the main video on Wednesdays too. So I'm really pumped to be a part of the channel. Super glad this is my first ADP Battles where I'm not just a guest. I'm actually a part of the thing. So, I just had to throw that in there. I'm pumped about it.
There you go, for sure. Yeah, we're going to have you your Twitter and everything linked in the description as well. Again, the newest member of the FSC team. Go check him out. Buddy's grinding. We still got to convince him that Todd Gurley's a no-go. I mean, I know some of you in the comments are going to agree with him. So, I'm just playing with you.
Well, if you bring up Todd Gurley, you got to plug my article. Come on.
Yeah. Our article is going to be linked in the description. I'm going to plug it in there just because you said it. But just know that me and Bush are going to have a talk with him. No, I'm kidding. Anyways, I ramble on too much. Last thing I'm just going to quickly say, if you made it this far in the video and you enjoyed yourself, go comment what you think about the video, what you think about the picks, disagree, agree, whatever you want to say. Fuck. Tell me I want to look like a cutie. Tell Mikey he looks like a cutie. Whatever you want to say. We're down for it. But yeah, and if you made it this far, go like and subscribe because we're going to come at you with that daily content. But for next time, peace out.